Hi, Christy here. I have my Akashic Records open, and I want to start the exploration today with phobias. A friend of mine who's also a Jyutsu practitioner said recently she had a client who suddenly felt he had to get up from the table because of something that was going on for him, and he reported that it was a sort of phobia. Don't know all the details of that, but it's interesting how the phobia feeling, the sense, can just come out of nowhere and be so intense and so sort of crazy, like disproportional to what might be going on in your life. I have seen a few, not a ton, but I've seen a number of phobias, and when I look in the Akashic Records of the people, the phobias virtually always have been related to a past lifetime where something traumatic happened. Now, of course, something traumatic could have happened in this lifetime. You may know exactly why you're afraid of water. You may have almost drowned or something. But this idea that's sitting inside us is this memory, this history, this unresolved trauma, whether it's the level of a phobia or if it's the level of something that's not quite as extreme, but still activated, I think is interesting to look at from the Akashic perspective. First of all, how do we soothe this? How do we overcome it, or at least make peace with it enough that it doesn't prevent us from doing things? I had a friend that had agoraphobia, where for a few years, it was before I met her, she had trouble leaving the house because, it was just overwhelming and whatever, and probably I would guess that came from other lifetimes, or maybe one other lifetime, but from another lifetime where something happened out in the world and it was too much and she couldn't handle whatever went on there. So I'm going to play around in here for a minute to see kind of what questions I can ask to get down to sort of how is this useful for us as souls, and how do we use this as part of our growth and evolution, our learning, and just see kind of what I see in here. So they're talking a lot about finding our way through being caught, not being free. If you're claustrophobic and you're in that moment of, maybe it's in an elevator and the elevator stops or something, and you're in that moment of complete panic. It's so extreme that you can barely move, barely breathe or whatever. It really gets your attention, and it really makes you say, oh, there's something here that needs to be looked at. Well, I'm not very phobic of things, but I do have a touch of claustrophobia. When I was in graduate school, I had to do scuba training. I worked in a clean room for making microchips as part of my doctoral research. And I had to do scuba training in case there was some sort of chemical emergency and we had to put on this gear. And I can remember feeling like very confined and very trapped in a way. I was, it was like, oh, this is worse than the chemical event if we ever have one. But, I got through it and so on. But I sometimes feel a touch of that. And it really brings you up short. It really is in your face, in my face in this case, literally. I went to a cave with my friend over the weekend, last week. And luckily it was a cave that there's plenty of room, doesn't feel like, I can't imagine the discoverers of this cave. It's Karshner Caverns in Arizona in the US. These guys burrowed through these little holes. They as they were discovering the cave back in 1974, I think it was. I cannot imagine, I can't imagine doing that. And that's why I won't do it, because that does not appeal to me. But this piece of, why would we bother to carry trauma through from one lifetime to another? First of all, why doesn't it get resolved in the first lifetime, or the precipitating lifetime, the lifetime where it was caused? And I think when I look in here that it was just too much. Like the vividness of the event, of the trauma, made it very clear that not pursuing this was in the highest good. Versus now in another lifetime, you've got a little more distance from it. It comes back around to be looked at, to be healed, to be resolved, to help you become less fearful. I mean, we talk about the poles of fear and love. So if you're in some kind of phobia, you've taken that fear all the way to the far end of the scale. Versus how can I, well, first of all, it may start with how do I love myself even though, that's a big Akashic thing. How do I love myself even though I have this phobia? And then how do I love myself as I work through it? And how do I love myself as someone who used to have it, perhaps, if you can move through to that place? And that's the place where this soul growth and evolution can take place. Now, maybe you never do. Maybe you're like, I am just gonna not go there. I'm sure I've told the story on video before. My father never learned how to swim in his lifetime. He's passed away now, but when he was alive, he never learned how to swim. And he would report that sometimes in the shower, he was afraid he would drown. And I'm convinced that was a phobia. Although he would never be interested in the Akashic Records. That would be crazy stuff for him. So he never resolved it. He just avoided the water, which is one option. And the other option is to say, oh, what's this here for? And why do I have this? Now, I haven't spent a lot of time on the claustrophobia because I don't find myself there's really only that one time, and there was one other incident maybe. And I'm in my 60s. So something that has happened twice in my lifetime. Yeah, it doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, I really need to go work on this. But if you had something like agoraphobia and you could not leave your house, you'd have incentive, you'd have motivation. Anyway, enough of that. So I'd love to hear in the comments below whether you feel like you have some kind of phobia, and if so, what you have done to work towards overcoming it. I look forward to seeing you in the next video, and in the meantime, please go be brilliant.